C-SPAN.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your phoning in from Little Rock. Next on C-SPAN, the Senate debate, and I'm keeping my eye on the monitor there from New York, where this is scheduled to begin live in just a second or so. And I will again remind you, live coverage and then open phones once it's over to get your comments on what you've heard. And again, this is the New York race tomorrow, but tomorrow on C-SPAN, lots of discussion about the other Senate races going on. Let's listen in to the New York WNBC Senate debate.
Decision 92, a senatorial debate. And now, live from Studio 3B, your host, News 4 New York's Gabe Pressman.
Good morning. And what started out as a battle to replace Alphonse D'Amato as a United States Senator from New York is becoming a tense and sometimes bitter fight among Democrats. On Tuesday, voters in the Democratic primary will choose one of the four candidates seated here with me to run against Senator D'Amato. And today, on the Sunday before election, in a Channel 4 tradition, they're gathered in our studio for a final debate before Election Day. They are, in alphabetical order, New York State Attorney General Robert Abrams, former Congresswoman and Vice Presidential candidate Geraldine Ferraro, New York City Controller Elizabeth Holtzman, and civil rights activist the Reverend Al Sharpton. Good morning to all of you and welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
In the first part of this program, I'll be asking each of you questions. I'd appreciate brief, responsive answers, and you'll be allowed to comment on the answers of your opponents when that's a reasonable request. I'll only hold a stopwatch on you if that's necessary to keep things fair. At some point later, I hope you'll be allowed to ask, there'll be enough time for you to ask questions of each other, probably a limited number. Okay, let's start with a question to all of you. What's bothering the people of New York right now as you see it? The first three things that come to your mind. Reverend Sharpton?
I think the economy, I think health care, and I think equal protection under the law. I think those are the critical issues that are bothering most people in this nation. I think the failure of those that have been in power to really make progress in those areas are the things that most disturb our people.
Mr. Abrams?
Jobs. People are out of work. They want the dignity of work, the ability to provide for their families. Education, critically important. People, middle-class people, having a tough time providing for the education of their kids if they want to go on to college. And, of course, those who are eligible for Head Start are not getting in. Another critical issue is, now that the Cold War is over, why don't we get some money to really deal with the whole myriad of problems, including health care? Health care is a critical issue.
Okay, that's three. Ms. Holtzman?
Well, jobs obviously is a crucial issue, and how we can cut our military budget and bring those monies home to rebuild our cities, to put people to work. Healthcare, too, is a critical factor. We have a healthcare system in which the first question you're asked when you walk into a doctor's office is how are you going to pay the bill, and not what's wrong with you.
Okay.
And finally, I think people are concerned about assuring basic rights, women's right to choose, rights, civil rights to be agreed on and protected. Those are critical things for New Yorkers, and also to defeat Alphonse D'Amato.
Ms. Ferraro?
I would concur. I think that the three main issues are jobs, education, and health care, but there's a different feeling out there, Gabe, now that I didn't see in any other race or any other election. And that's that now people are afraid about the future. They're scared for themselves and their kids. They have absolutely no confidence that anybody in government is going to be able to help them. And so what they're doing is they're saying, do me a favor, when you get down there, produce. And it's produce, again, on these three issues: jobs, health care, and education.
Have you made any mistakes in your campaigns, Ms. Ferraro?
No, I think we've done okay. We have had a campaign for the past 16 months in which we have gone out and spoken to the issues throughout the state. We have very much a grassroots effort going. We have 4 offices. We've been up to upstate New York 14 times in the past
You don't
year.
think
We've done just fine.
You don't think blowing a 20-point lead comes under the category?
I have to tell you, I remind you that last year I was 16 points behind Bob Abrams and 20 points behind Al D'Amato. I'm still ahead, not by as much, obviously, but I am ahead of Bob, so I have done very well. It has been a lead that has pulled itself together because of the grassroots support that we have, and I am in a position where I will beat Al D'Amato by big numbers in November.
Any mistakes?
Well, Gabe, I don't ever look back. I always look forward, and I think...
No, but the question is, did you make any mistakes in this
I probably
campaign?
made a million mistakes. You want to talk to my wife and daughters, they'll probably say it was 2 million mistakes in the course of this campaign. And maybe one of the mistakes was to not prod the press more to get into this race at an earlier juncture. So
Was it not making up your mind on the Gulf War a mistake?
No.
I
indicated at the outset that I supported the president and the application of the troops right from the start, and that we should have even done more in terms of not just disengaging the troops from Kuwait, but getting rid of Saddam Hussein.
Did you make any mistakes?
Oh, I'm sure we made plenty. But you know, there's a central issue in this campaign, Gabe, and I think all of us recognize that when Geraldine Ferraro ran for the vice presidency, her race was a symbol for all Americans. It was a symbol for Me Too, of women breaking through an important barrier. And in this race, there have been serious allegations raised about Geraldine Ferraro. They've been raised by the press, they've been raised by Bob Abrams, they've been raised by me, and they're unpleasant. They're unpleasant to raise, and they're unpleasant truths. But no one likes illusions shattered.
Well,
and the issue in this race...
Was it a mistake for you to go negative? Have you hurt your own reputation by doing that?
The newspapers raised allegations, Bob Abrams raised allegations, and I did. And these are unpleasant to raise because, as I said, no one likes illusions shattered. But the issue in this race, Gabe, is no longer about illusions and no longer about symbols. The issue is about truth, and the issue is about defeating Alphonse D'Amato. Which woman can defeat Alphonse D'Amato?
Okay,
I know I can. I don't believe Geraldine Ferraro can.
We're going to get to the issues that you raised, and you'll be given a chance to reply, Ms. Ferraro. I mean, this so-called character and ethics issue in just a moment. And after that, I hope we'll get to some of the general issues before we get to the questioning by the candidates of each other. Mr. Sharpton, what about you?
Well, I have done what I wanted to do. I think when I entered this race, people said that we would never get this far. We have. I have spent less than $100,000, have 9 offices, doing very well across the state. El Diario supporting me, Amsterdam News. The mistakes I made was 86, joining ministers and supporting D'Amato, and I'll make up for that when I retire him in November.
Okay. Is it right that finally, when the media and the public are focused on the campaign, that you've concentrated in the last few weeks on attacks on each other? Clearly the economy, healthcare, those things you mentioned earlier are of such concern to the voters. Do you think that this so-called ethics and character issue, that it's right to pursue it? Ms. Holtzman?
Well, I think that to separate issues in Washington from character and ethics is not correct, because you've got to have the conscience and the principles to be able to stand up for what's right, and you also can't take into the Senate the morals of the marketplace. We've seen what that's gotten us in terms of the savings and loan scandal, and the fact of the matter is, as we sit here now, those are issues that are central.
Mm-hmm. Now, on the ethics issue, Ralph Blumenthal in the New York Times yesterday, and Barrett and Bastone earlier in The Voice, reported that Ms. Ferraro's husband, John Zuccaro, was observed in a meeting with a reputed mob figure back in 1985. What does that have to do with the Senate race?
Well, I think what they reported in yesterday's Times, which is very disturbing to all people, is the fact that Geraldine Ferraro denied that a meeting had taken place, and there was a law enforcement with this child pornographer with links to organized crime, and there was a law enforcement officer who noted that the meeting actually took place, and she denied it repeatedly.
I mean, 2 people talking to each other on a sidewalk?
For 15 minutes, that's right.
And the fact that your staff tipped off the Times reporter about the existence of this report, of this meeting, is this an act of political desperation?
Gabe, first of all, the report was a matter of public record. It was obtained by the New York Times from the agency, and secondly, it had been reported on in the Village Voice a month ago.
Right,
so,
and the fact
that was a public record.
Abrams,
and the real issue, you know, it's like Anita Hill, Gabe. The issue isn't who told about it. The issue is the substance, and the question here is, why did Geraldine Ferraro deny it? And why? And
Mr. Abrams, the fact that report was furnished with such alacrity by the Organized Crime Task Force, which is within the Attorney General's agency, does that show political motivation?
Of course not. I mean, it's separated from the Attorney General's office. It's run independently. But Gabe, you know, for the bulk of this campaign, I've been trying to distinguish my views on issues from some of the key people here, and as the race was between Geraldine, Ferraro, and myself in the last couple of months, I've been zeroing in how I'm different from her on health care and for a single-payer national health insurance program, how I'm for taking advantage of the end of the Cold War, how she's just for modest, tepid cuts and cutting the budget. I want to pump hundreds of millions of dollars in. The press never really focused on those kinds of issues. Just this week, let me give you a good example. We had a press conference where hundreds of women activists came out to support me. We had the Conscience of America here, Ralph Nader, come to indicate clear support for me.
But yesterday, on almost the eve of the election, you stood with a man, Thomas Pickell, a former special prosecutor, as he charged that Miss Ferraro told Santucci that she'd get him and commit suicide if he went after her husband.
Well, he said that...
So obviously you consider these issues important enough.
He said that Geraldine Ferraro, in his presence, threatened the district attorney of Queens County.
Okay, look, before...
she would ruin him if he continued the investigation
Reverend
of her
Sharpton,
husband. That's what he said.
Reverend Sharpton, I'll let you be the cleanup man here, but
I need just 2 minutes to respond.
Miss Ferraro, there have been a lot of allegations here, and I'd like to ask you now, when you said on Thursday that my husband didn't know this man, DiBernardo, and never met him, in view of this report, were you wrong?
No, I'm absolutely right. And let me just point out 3 things. First of all, why would I have a motive to lie if indeed John had ever met this guy and talked to him? The world knows that this guy had leased space in his building. In fact, Liz has been beating up on me about this lease that is already had expired, and the guy's been out for 5 years. She's been beating up on me in her commercials for the last month. Now, so there would be no reason for me to deny it if indeed he had. There's nothing wrong with a landlord meeting a tenant. But going a step past that, what Liz doesn't understand, I've been married to this man for 32 years. I know the one thing between us is that he doesn't lie. But number 3, I also know that as a former prosecutor that there are ways to create reports in files, especially when that report is signed by a man who is dead. The person who signed the report is no longer in. Now, let me just also add, not only did Liz's person tip them off about this report, and the report, the name of the person that they're supposed to get it from, under the Freedom of Information Act, and anybody who's ever attempted to get anything under the Freedom of Information Act, I'm sure you too, you don't get it done within an hour by fax mail back. It usually takes 5 days each way to turn it around. But the person who supplied it was a person who worked in Liz Holtzman's office, Richard Lasky, for years as one of her top assistants. Now, let me go the next step further, and that is that I have been told that one of the news organizations has a show that they are preparing that will deal with the involvement of law enforcement agencies in political campaigns. That show is being prepared for mid-October. I spent a lot of time on the phone yesterday and this morning confirming that.
Well, okay.
And so I am absolutely convinced that this report, and I haven't seen it, I guess Liz has, because not anything about 15 minutes was in the New York Times. I guess she's seen the report, I haven't. But I would bet to you that it is a phony and that it is a setup, an attempt to destroy me 4 days before the primary. That's number 1. Now let me get
Did you ever say to Mr. Santucci that you were going to get him? No. Did such a meeting take place?
And that I was going to commit suicide. Now, first of all, I'm a Catholic, Bob, and we do not endorse suicide. I mean, that is not something that I would
Jews
do.
Or Protestants do either.
And so
it's not healthy in any religion.
No, it really is bad business. Obviously, I don't, in my religion doesn't endorse it, but secondly, if I threatened it, why didn't I do it? I mean, it's obvious that I didn't. Now, you get the next step further, and there's another person available at that meeting whose name is Robert Morvillo. He is an attorney.
He's your lawyer.
He was not my lawyer. He was my husband's lawyer. He was in the thing. When he saw the article, he started to laugh, and then he became angry. He's written a letter to the Village Voice indicating that that did not happen. Paul Kupkale has a lot of problems. As you know, he worked for Maurice Najari years ago. He was fired after Najari left. He then went to work for Santucci. He lost virtually every case that he brought there. He then ran for DA up in Westchester and lost there. You're standing in front of a place with a loser who has a thing about me, and I can't help it, 4 days before the election.
Why don't we ask John
what we'll do.
Santucci? He was there.
Well, why didn't he respond? Evidently, the newspapers tried to get him, and you didn't get him.
He was
John
there.
Santucci.
I agree with you. Let's get him.
But
Let's
you should
find
have
out.
done
Let's
that.
find out.
As
Let's find
Attorney
out what he-
General, Bob, you should have done that before you called the press conference. That's the issue. You are jumping out, doing press releases without any certification on the facts, including you have lied about my position on health care. You turn around and tell people I don't support a national health care plan. I do. I support the same system that Clinton does.
But
And we will
that's-
talk about defense a little bit
beside
later.
the point, Jerry. You're not
Okay.
supporting
No,
a
you
single-payer national health insurance
That-
plan.
That's right.
You're
That's
supporting
right.
continuation
it's still
of the
national.
private.
Is it not national health
It
care?
is not.
It is not national.
It is not a national.
Gotta learn the
it is-
issues.
All right.
It is not
You've gotta
a
learn.
nationally.
You've gotta learn the
Jerry,
issues,
All right.
by
You really
badgering
do.
All right.
doesn't
You're both-
get you the truth.
You're both
Yeah,
very
you gotta
competent
learn this.
lawyers. I rule you out of order at this point. Reverend Sharpton.
I think what has disturbed me is the obvious obsession with political garbage that has gone down in this campaign. I think ethics has a place in any campaign, but just to be ethical, just to be law-abiding, good citizens, does not make you correct on all the issues and make you fit to represent everybody. In the South, it was very ethical, church-going men, went home to their wives every night, paid their tax on time, that were the biggest Jim Crow advocates in the South. They didn't have anything wrong with them other than they hung black people on the weekends and ran Jews out of town. So just to prove that you're honest does not mean you should be representing the state of New York in the United States Senate. I think that we ought to have that in its place. But to have a budget where 90% of your commercials is to throw mud while people are dying in hospital waiting rooms, while people are in the streets angry about police brutality, while people are unemployed, while they were arguing about her 8-year-old landlord-tenant situation, 2.1 million people were added to the poverty lines. My problem is I did not enter this race to just argue about someone's dirty linen and someone, whether they did or did not evict someone, when I'm worried about being evicted myself if we keep sending the wrong senator to Washington.
But, you know, I think, Reverend Sharpton, you're missing a point here. Because if someone makes a promise, and we all sit here and we make promises, and what are the people supposed to base their decision? Let me finish.
As a
Let me just
public
finish.
official.
Let me just finish.
All
If
right.
you make
Public
a
official.
promise and you don't carry it out, then that says something to the people. Geraldine Ferraro made a promise in 1984 that she would evict these people. She didn't do that.
And that should be raised, Ms. Holtzman, but it should not be the only thing we raise.
Well, exactly.
You promised to investigate the First Bank of Boston about their dealings with South Africa.
And
it's
we will.
over a year later, and we haven't heard a result on that.
Okay.
Well, we will.
One day when the morning comes.
We will.
One day when the morning
Okay.
comes.
We
okay.
will, Mr. Sharpton.
Let's put.
And that's the whole
yeah.
point.
The whole
Now, let me
point is you
respond.
want
All right,
what
let's
you want,
move.
but you want the people to wait until Liz Holtzman
No.
says we will.
No.
That is not playing by one set of rules.
I'll tell
Okay.
you the set of rules, Mr. Sharpton, and what the rule is. I gave my word that
A year ago, over a year ago.
Yes, but let me finish my sentence. What did I give my word to? I gave my word that before there would
Okay,
be
now-
let me finish. Before there would be a renewal of this contract,
I'm gonna let you finish,
it would
but I
be
wanna-
investigated.
I wanna-
That
You said that you would
contract.
investigate.
I wanna put that in-
Connecticut and LA
Yeah.
has already thrown them
All right.
out
Wait a
for
minute.
South Africa, and they are still doing
Okay,
business
both
in
of
New
you
York.
are out of order. I'm going to deal with that right now, but first I want to ask everybody here a question. Do you believe that Geraldine Ferraro, everyone but Geraldine Ferraro, has been associated with organized crime figures? Yes or no? Mr. Abrams.
Gabe, that's not relevant to this discussion. You know,
Is the answer yes or no?
Gabe, I've never said that. To my knowledge, I don't know, and it's not relevant
What do
here.
you think,
What's
Ms. Holtzman?
relevant?
I'm not sure I
Gabe, you
understand
don't
your
let us
question.
talk about issues. In
No,
this campaign.
I want to talk about issues, but you guys have brought this up, and I want to dispose
I
of
have
it.
never brought that up.
Well,
Do
what
you
is your
believe? Do
question?
you believe that Geraldine Ferraro has been associated with organized crime figures?
Well, I think she has to answer to whatever allegations have been raised. And one of the things that's disturbed me is that she hasn't answered some of the questions that have been raised, such as she has never denied taking $340,000 from a child pornographer, and she hasn't denied, and she's
Who
never
was an organized
apologized.
crime figure?
Well, what his background was is not as important to me as the other issues that are raised with this. But the issues here that we'd like to talk about are how we're going to fight in the U.S. Senate, how we're going to fight in the U.S. Senate
Okay.
for jobs and health care and education and
Reverend
women's
Sharpton,
choice.
yes or no? Do you think she's been associated with organized crime figures?
I don't know, and I hate to be so direct. Well, opponents filibuster, but I don't know, and I've never raised that. I have no idea.
Okay, Mr. Abrams and Ms. Holtzman, you stand accused by Ms. Ferraro of using innuendo, smears, and lies. And how do you plead to those charges, guilty or not guilty?
Gabe, I mean, this program is not being overly constructive. I mean...
I am merely trying to distill what
guilty,
you
not guilty.
and Ms. Holtzman have been saying, what Ms. Ferraro has been answering all these past 10 days.
I have, in this campaign...
Have you engaged in smears and lies?
Of course not.
Have you?
Just a minute,
absolutely
Gabe.
not.
Okay, I want to go on to something about you. Mr. Abrams and Ms. Holtzman. Ms. Ferraro says that you both accepted contributions from firms doing business with your agencies. Of the first $1 million you raised for your Senate campaign, Ms. Holtzman, about 1/3 came from 21 investment banking firms that you helped select to sell New York City bonds. Is that likely to instill public confidence?
Well, first of all, let me just say this. Everybody knows that Liz Holtzman can't be bought. And I'll tell you, just to respond to what Reverend Sharpton said about First Boston, because I think it's important.
Right.
Some employees from First Boston did make contributions to me, and then what happened? Just very recently, an allegation came to my attention that First Boston may have mishandled a New York City bond transaction. I immediately directed that allegation be turned over to the SEC. Let me finish.
But I understand you accepted $20,000 in contributions from after the matter came out about their links to South Africa.
Wait, let me just finish what I'm saying, and I'll answer South Africa. I immediately referred an allegation to the SEC for investigation. They are an independent United States agency. Right. I mean, if I were influenced by campaign contributions, would I immediately have referred that to an outside agency? Absolutely not. And by the way, let me say, the mayor is a joint participant in the selection of these underwriters. The mayor wasn't the one who referred it. I referred it. And with regard to South Africa, I've always fought against apartheid, and let me say, when Nelson Mandela came to this country, I was very proud to be able to announce that we had New York City pension funds had divested $600 million in businesses doing business with South Africa.
Mr. Abrams, according to New York Newsday, you received more than $120,000 from attorneys who do business with your office. Is that true or false?
I don't know the precise number. Lawyers have contributed to my campaign. What the reality is, Gabe, is that I make appointments on the merits to people who work in the Attorney General's office. They are people of high quality, tremendous integrity, and whenever I am in a campaign, it is totally separate from the operations of the Attorney General's office. Nobody in the Attorney General's office knows about any contributions that are made to any of my campaigns.
Although the Ferrick Commission said that it's bad public policy for people like you and Ms. Holtzman or the mayor or the governor to take contributions from people who do business with their agencies or the agencies under their command.
Look, the Ferrick Commission had an institutional review of campaign financing in New York State. They looked at all the citywide elected officials, they looked at all of the statewide elected officials, and they found things that they didn't like because the system is inherently flawed. But as it related to me, there wasn't a single issue of any illegality, of any violation, and they poured over hundreds of thousands of documents. Now, that is the reality of what happened as a result of the Ferrick.
But Gabe, I think there's two issues here. I would not accuse either Ms. Holtzman or Mr. Abrams of impropriety. I think the question becomes that if the people on Wall Street, that in my judgment has helped set an economic policy that excuses major corporations and the wealthy from taxes, find that they can contribute to their campaign, does that mean that they feel that these people ideologically are in step with Wall Street and would represent their interests in Washington? I don't see any Wall Street bankers sending me any money, so obviously they must be at least politically in step with these people's campaign and feel that they will not disturb the present tax code. I think the other thing here, Gabe, that is very important is to say that I don't know what one side of my office is doing. Well, are we going to send them to Washington and they have people running all over the hill cutting deals and they start talking then about a Chinese wall? I mean, does this wall, Mr. Abrams, move with you to Washington, or are you going to get a new interior decorator?
What will go with me to Washington, Reverend Sharpton, is Bob Abrams, a man of character, independence,
but you admit
and
your
integrity.
staff is out of control. You have one side not knowing what the other side is doing. That's not a way to run an office.
That's not my staff out of control. control.
Okay.
That is a separation of being a political candidate from running a governmental office.
Let's this get out of control, Mr. Sharpton, so that you don't enjoy complete immunity from the from these charges. State tax evasion charges are still pending against you. Do you find it unusual to be in the same race as the man prosecuting you, Mr. Abrams?
Oh no, me and Bob would have been fighting whether I was in this race or not. It's not unusual. As well as what's unusual is that the federal government investigated me for those same years and did not find anything wrong with the same form. It's very unusual to violate state tax and not federal tax on the same.
If Mr. Abrams wins this primary, despite your past differences in the Tawana Brawley case and the tax case, are you still ready to support this man?
I would support whoever I think will do what is proper for all the citizens in New York.
That doesn't answer the question.
Well, again, I have to, at that time, sit down and analyze who I think is the best candidate. At this point, I think Mr. Abrams would do some things that Mr. D'Amato wouldn't do, but whether that would be enough to support him, I don't know. I would be very interested in knowing whether Mr. Abrams would support me.
Okay, let's move on to some other issues, and let's...
Don't evade the issues, Bob.
Would you support him if he won?
Do you prove guilty or not guilty today?
Okay,
I'm
sorry. I wasn't paying strict attention. I apologize. Would you support Mr. Sharpton? That's what you wanted to know, right?
I raised it rhetorically, but he can ask if he wants.
I'm different from all the candidates here in that I'm already a candidate in the general election on the Liberal Party line. Al D'Amato has 3 party lines. He's the candidate of the Republican Party, the Conservative Party, and the Right to Life Party. And the way we're going to topple and get rid of Al D'Amato is to bring about a coalition, women and men, upstate, downstate, Democrat and liberal. Nobody has been elected as a Democrat in this state in the last 50 years for any office, governor, controller, attorney general, senator, without also being a candidate of the Liberal Party. So that's what gives me strength in running in this primary. So, you know, if you want to know about support, it's going to be for Bob Abrams after Tuesday because he's going to be the Democrat and Liberal Party candidate.
Let me say something good about that.
Sure.
I'm prepared to support the Democratic nominee, and I've never played any games about that issue. And secondly, I think the real question here is, can we beat Alphonse D'Amato? And what kind of person we need to defeat him. D'Amato has had an anti-civil rights, anti-choice, anti-jobs, anti-environment philosophy. I think we need to replace him, but I'm running for the U.S. Senate not just to join the Senate. And I think we need to get a Senate that gets it on women's rights, that gets it on health care, that gets it on choice. And I think that they're two. And I also can represent a change in the Senate. There are only 2 women in the United States Senate, 98 men.
Right.
That 2% is good for milk, maybe, but not for the U.S. Senate.
In 1980, this woman on my left, Ms. Holtzman, she ran, but Jacob Javits ran as a liberal candidate, and that enabled D'Amato to win in a 3-way race in the general election.
Right.
Are you worried that that could happen again if somebody other than you wins the Democratic primary?
No, you weren't listening before, Gabe. The way you're going to be able to win is to have a coalition built, the strongest candidate who can go up against D'Amato and beat him. I'm the only one who's won a statewide race.
I was listening, and the question remains: if you don't win this Democratic primary and you run as a liberal, won't you make it easier for Alphonse D'Amato to win?
We'll talk about that the day after the primary, and I'm sure when that conversation takes place, it'll be with the Democrat and Liberal Party candidate.
Bob has indicated that he is the Liberal Party candidate as if the party went to a convention and he won that nomination.
They did, Jerry.
After you gave them $50,000 a year and a half ago for that nomination. No, I'm not. Did you not give a campaign contribution? Did you not give a contribution to the Liberal Party for $50,000?
I didn't personally give a contribution to the Liberal Party.
Did you raise $50,000 for them?
Jerry.
You did, Bob.
You better get your facts.
Well, he did.
Okay,
he raised $50,000. Let me go further than that. But the issue then becomes what do we as Democrats care to do? Now, both Bob and Liz and the Reverend Sharpton and I have gone around for the last number of months saying Al D'Amato does not belong in the United States Senate. Bob has received the Democratic nomination for his entire 27 years in office. Either you fought for it or you won it, but you have run on the Democratic Party.
I was an independent, not a candidate of the bosses, Jerry.
No. Did you run as a Democrat? In fact, didn't you run this Democrat for Attorney General?
As a Democrat liberal.
Yes. Okay, whatever, but a Democrat.
Okay.
Now, wait a minute. The issue is, Bob, as a Democrat, do you think it's ethical to sit there and say that you will not support a candidate in a three-way race, which is what I'm getting from you, who is running against Al D'Amato in the Democratic Party.
You're not getting that from me, Jerry.
Well, that's not what you're saying? You're not saying that
Jerry,
you will not support
I'm
it.
saying that in this state, no Democrat in the last 50 years...
We heard that, Bob.
I know, Jerry.
But could you... But listen
in
to
the
the
last
question.
50 years...
Listen to the question.
In the last 50 years, no Democrat has ever won a state.
Okay, let's move on.
Are you
That's
ready
why
to
people are
support the
hungry to get rid of
But
Al
that's not the issue.
Enough. No, I'm blowing the whistle. That's what I want to do. I want to go to issues.
Yes,
Okay,
Thank you.
let's go to general issues.
Thank you.
For senators. If you'd been in the Senate when they voted last year on the Persian Gulf resolution, would you have voted that day to authorize the use of force? Ms. Holtzman?
Well, I made my position very clear at that time. One, I stood up for extension of sanctions, but when the war started, I supported the military effort. I was in Israel at the time the Scud missiles were flying, and I feel very strongly about the state of Israel, and I think it's important for the United States to stand up when it's appropriate. But I also think that we've got to use every effort first, as we didn't use in that case, to exhaust peaceful efforts. In fact, the Bush administration was responsible for allowing Saddam Hussein to build itself up militarily by allowing technological transfers of weapons.
I would not have at that time. I feel that we should have extended the sanctions. We should have extended negotiations. I think that the sad case is that we sent people over to the Persian Gulf. We took out our yellow ribbons and waved how we loved them. And when they got home, we didn't have jobs for them. We didn't have housing for them. And the love that we portrayed for them when they were willing to die for us, we did not portray when they came home to live for themselves.
Would you have authorized force?
I supported the president's use of force. It would have been a very, very close vote for me, Gabe.
Well, I supported the continuation of economic sanctions, but again, I did not take 4 months to make that decision, as Bob did. I took
Jerry,
it was
you're
immediate.
misstating
No, it's not
things
misstating. It's
all
all
over
a
this
matter of
program,
record.
Jerry.
No, I'm not.
You're
It's a
showing
matter
your
of
lack
record.
of credibility again.
Take a look at the record, Gabe, and we'll take
Absolutely.
press notes,
I'd
and
be
we will
delighted.
absolutely
Okay,
we'll show where that is.
Okay,
everybody knows.
Let's
that you
move
need 4
on.
months to make a
Let's
decision.
move
Let
on.
me just continue. I would support the continuation of economic sanctions, but let me go the step further. That when we're talking about military action in there, and if indeed you would support that kind of action again, tell me how you would support it in light of the defense cuts that you are talking about now, how you will be able to deal with national security when indeed we have another problem with Saddam Hussein in Iraq and perhaps in some of the other hot spots, whether it's in the Panama Canal
It's
or
a great
anyplace
question.
else.
So let's stay on it because we're finally getting to some substance
That's
here.
it. Issue.
Because it shows how Jerry doesn't understand what I've been saying for months. And again, she has misstated my position on this so many times.
No, I haven't. This is the first time I've even mentioned it.
minute.
This is the first time I've mentioned it.
Let's get to a substantive
Mention it.
issue.
Sure, go ahead.
See, Jerry and I differ on what the end of the Cold War really means. I'm saying that we should be cutting the defense budget by 50% by the end of this decade.
And will that give
2001.
us enough for military intervention?
In the next 5 years, between now and 1997, it should be a $282 billion cut. By the end of the decade, even with the 50% cut, we would have twice the firepower, twice the forces that were in the Persian Gulf. 1,100,000 men and women in uniform. We would still be able to protect ourselves, our values, the values of our allies, but we wouldn't be spending it uselessly on Seawolf submarines that cost $2 billion,
Do you agree?
which if you cancel, you can double the number of the kids in the Head Start program.
I think what has to be done is that Bob has to go through each and every one of the weapons that he would suggest cutting.
I have that in the position paper,
I'm
Jerry.
talking about cutting Seawolf submarines over a 5-year period of time, $14 billion. I'm talking about weapons production and ending that $10 billion. I'm talking about cutting through.
Somebody else is having some conversation about this. And I really think that this is not. I really think somebody else have a say.
Hang on a minute. Okay, I think you both established how you feel about that. And I think Ms. Holtzman wants to make a comment. Reverend Sharpton, I'd like to move on to something else which is related to that.
Well, I'd like to make more than a comment because the military budget is something very serious. And when I was in Congress, I was the first one to introduce what was called a transfer amendment to take money from the military budget and put it into social programs such as housing, employment, education, and the like. And this is an area that I differ from Geraldine Ferraro because she voted against an amendment such as that. But I also agree with her in her saying that Bob Abrams didn't take a position on the Gulf War because I was in a debate with him in in Staten Island, just as she was, and that was months after the war was over, and he didn't take a position. But let me go. I want to talk about the military budget for a second. No, excuse me, Bob, for a second.
Right.
Let me just answer on the military budget. The Cold War is over. I was on the House Budget Committee for 5 years. There is immense waste in that budget. The budget is predicated on Soviet Union, on fighting 2.5 wars at the same time. Jerry, we can cut that budget in half. We probably, if we really looked hard at it, can cut it even more. But the issue isn't just the cuts. The issue is the rationality and intelligence with which we make them, and also preparing for a civilian economy.
Okay. Order, please. I'm just a humble philosopher searching for the truth here. What exactly is the difference in numbers between what you advocate, what she advocates, and what you advocate?
On the defense budget?
Yeah, just tell me how much. How much would you save?
Jerry is saying, President Bush.
I'll say what I'm saying.
No, let her say
Please,
it.
Jerry.
Okay, I don't want to know.
Fine.
No, I just want to know what you would save.
Children are watching.
That's
TV.
right, I
know.
For the next 5 years, I'm talking about a $282 billion in cut in the defense budget. Jerry's talking about $100 billion.
What are you talking about in terms of
I will
cuts?
say my own. I'm talking about President Clinton's proposal, as well as virtually every responsible person in the United
Which
States
is how
Senate and
much,
House
Jared?
who is
How much,
looking.
Jerry?
I'll tell you. I think I'll
Don't
tell you
interrupt.
exactly where the president's
How much, Jerry?
our nominee stands.
How much?
$100 billion.
That's right. That's
are you
what I
saying
said.
the presidential nominee? Well, so what does that mean? You're saying the presidential nominee is soft on
Okay,
defense?
what do you say in terms of money?
I don't agree with Bill Clinton on this position, and that's why I'm going to be a strong senator, because
much
I
money
would
would
be
you
able to
save?
stand
Tell
up
us
to
that.
even a Democratic
How
president.
much money would you save?
I would cut the military budget in half. I'd save a few $1 billion, even more than Bob Abrams
Now, what would that be
And-
by cutting it in half, approximately?
well, close to $300 billion is what I'm talking about in the next 5 years. And let me just say, how?
How?
Well, first of all, we're going to eliminate the waste in procurement.
How much is that?
Secondly, billions and
How
even
much?
more. Jerry, when we start looking at it closely,
that's
Okay,
even
there
more.
are other.
And in addition to that,
Okay, there are other issues.
don't
I don't
need-
want to go into the nitty-gritty of
I
how
would
in
do
this
half.
question.
I think half would be around 320 billion.
Okay, so you
And
say
a lot
300
of
billion.
it, let's not forget the Star
All right,
Wars
let's go.
program
Let's
as well.
go on. Let's go on. You save a lot of money
Yeah.
on the defense budget. You all agree on that. What would your number one
We don't all
priority
agree
be?
on that.
What
I
would
think
your?
it's a big difference,
Well, you all
Dave.
agree that you'll save a lot of money. A
Yeah.
lot of money to me is billions of dollars.
But when our needs
yeah.
are so huge for homelessness and for education,
okay.
to talk about cutting
Next
the military
question.
budget only $100 billion is
what would
really
you-
wrong.
What would your number one priority be for using that money? Poverty, reducing taxes, reducing the deficit, national health insurance, housing, the environment? Number one priority.
Well, there are a couple that immediately come to mind, Gabe. Education is critically important. We're not going to be competitive in a world economy.
Okay, I asked for one.
You don't give us a chance to give
No,
some
I'm-
full
I'm-
meat to what our philosophies are, who we
Yeah,
are,
but
Gabe.
in a one-hour
If the
program,
viewers
I
are
think
gonna-
I think we have 4 people here. We're trying to expose as much as we can of your ideas. Ms. Ferraro, what do you see as the number one priority for that money?
I would do economic conversion, take the plants that we're taking off military building and put them into peacetime construction so that we can get our economy moving in a global economy. In addition to that, training those. In $100 billion, we're going to cut out 1.1 million people.
Okay.
I would take those and retrain them so that they can become productive people in our society, not forgetting what they've done for us in service.
Saltzman.
Well, first of all, you have to have an intelligent conversion program. We now have an Office of Conversion that's in the Pentagon. It can't do its job there. You have to take it out of the Pentagon so you can plan rationally to help the workers who are displaced and the industries that are displaced. But I would put the monies primarily into rebuilding our infrastructure so that we can have a transportation system that's efficient, put people to work at the same time, and also into education.
What about
We've got to invest in the future.
Reverend Sharp.
I would put it into job creation and into training until every American can support their family and can afford to live the lifestyle that is decent and respectable. We cannot begin to solve the problems. We are great at helping the world. We have failed in helping ourselves.
Okay, one short question. President Bush has announced plans to sell $9 billion in advanced F-15 fighters to Saudi Arabia. This is being justified because it does save jobs. It also means adding heavy new weapons to a volatile area of the world. Should there be a limit on what we do to save jobs?
Yes, I think it's a terrible policy to continue to sell military might to the tinderbox of the Middle East. I think the leadership of this country should be exercising control, not only in terms of its own resources and expenditure of money, but going to France and England and other allies and saying, let's not continue to sell this kind of military weaponry, which could explode in everybody's face.
And you, Ms. Holtzman?
I strongly oppose it. I oppose it because it's dangerous to the state of Israel, but it is a bankrupt policy to create jobs by exporting sophisticated weapons abroad. They were used against us in Iraq. They were used against us. They would be used against us elsewhere. And I think in addition to that, we ought to be creating long-term jobs by rebuilding our infrastructure, by educating our population, by investing in science and technology. This is bankrupt and political payoff.
What about you?
I think it's a desperate political move by the president, but at the same time, we've got to play the games by one set of rules. I would also not trade with countries that are doing military trade with South Africa. I don't think that you can protect countries and then let them go ahead and do what they want with countries that are just as detrimental to other people around the world. But I would not support Bush's plan because I think it's a clear political move to try to create jobs
Ms.
for
Ferraro?
voters.
When I was in the Congress, I opposed the sale of AWACS to Saudi Arabia because I was concerned that it would be a destabilizing factor. I agree that I would oppose the sale of the F-15s to Saudi Arabia, but I have to tell you something. What's going to happen is they will be passed, that will be approved by both houses. The thing that I think should happen is that there should be some leadership in the Senate to attach conditions to the use of those weapons and to the purchase of those weapons, so that at least if they're going to supply them to Saudi Arabia, they should at least supply the same type of things to Israel for its own protection.
By lot earlier, you took an order in asking questions of each other. You can ask a question of whomever you want. Mr. Abrams, you won the toss.
Jerry, let me use this opportunity to follow up a theme that really emerged just a few minutes ago as we were talking about the defense cuts, and you were saying that you were justifying your position because it happens to be the position of Bill Clinton.
Oh, no, that isn't what I was justifying.
Let me ask the question.
What's the question?
It characterizes what I said.
Okay, I know, don't interrupt him.
My philosophy in running for the Senate is that the senator from New York should be in the vanguard, should be a leader, should be at the cutting edge. And I see Geraldine Ferraro in this campaign being very timid in terms of differentiating herself.
What's the question?
On health care, she sides with the Democratic establishment.
Talk to her. You're asking her a question.
On defense cuts, you side with the Democratic establishment. Don't you think the next senator should be out there pushing the Democratic leadership in the Senate, pushing a Democratic president to do what is important for the national interests of the country? Isn't that the kind of leadership we want from a United States senator, and not one that always cozies up to the establishment position?
Ms. Ferraro?
But you're implying that I'm following leadership. How about it, Bob, if I'd say to you that they're following me on these issues?
But it's not far enough, Jerry.
Okay, let me just suggest to you, you raised precisely the right point. When I get elected, I will go down to Washington, not as a junior senator, and not as another guy to become part of the group down there. I go down as someone who has spent 6 years in public office. That's all I've ever been in office. But showed in those 6 years that I can be an effective leader. Take a look at the legislation I passed in the House. The reason I was sent to go and operate and be platform chair, the reason I got legislation...
You gave up the ERA when you were platform chair, Jerry.
You know, this is just out lie. Bob has done this for every single one of the issues.
Post, the New York
Every
Times,
issue
the Daily
going.
News.
It's the most amazing thing.
I'm going to run my stopwatch. I'll give you 20 seconds more. No interruptions, Mr. Abrams.
It's very rude. But the point is that I've gone down there, proven myself an effective leader. I will go down to Washington, not as just another junior senator from New York, but as someone who is a national leader who can work with people to get things done. The difference between us, Bob, is that you will tell people what they want to hear. I will tell them what I can get done.
All right, your time is up. The 20 seconds are up. You get the next question to whomever you want.
Well, I guess maybe following up on all of the campaign, and I guess maybe I should just ask this of Bob too. In the last month, I have heard my position lied about, but not only my position on issues, but also matters that have said about me. For instance, you said that I was found guilty of 10 ethical violations. And in fact, I went back and even read the report, and I was found guilty of nothing. I'd like to read, if I could, from the Ethics Committee. It takes me just a minute. It said that the Ethics Committee said the errors constituted technical violation. And then instead, one of the violations was that I listed the wrong name of the source of honor. The point is, I think that what's happened over the last number of months, and I find it surprising because, you know, I've always been a supporter of yours, and I always thought more of you, Bob, than this. Why have you taken my record and distorted it? And why have you lied about my position on issues?
You get 30 seconds to answer that.
Jerry, this is an 800-page report.
Right.
In the matter of Representative Geraldine Ferraro, a report of the Committee on Standards of Official Conduct.
Find the findings.
It found that you illegally concealed your husband's business interests.
No, it didn't.
It discovered, Jerry, please.
Read it in there, Bob.
Gabe, are you going to allow me to...
Now, you see, this was prepared for this, and I want him to show exactly, because we spent time going through it.
Concealed $60,000 of income. Jerry, you paid an extra $30,000 in taxes as a result.
No, it did not. That is not as a result of that.
You're defying what's the record.
In a brief,
listed the wrong.
In a brief colloquy
Did you
here,
have to pay $30,000 more in taxes as a result of the failure of disclosure?
Okay, I'm blowing the whistle. I'm blowing the whistle on both of you.
Another lie, and Bob Abrams will sit there with the book and lie to the people of the state.
Reverend
and they have to understand.
You have the next question. You're at the plate next.
I'd like to ask Mr.
And you're on deck, Ms. Holtzman.
I'd like to ask Mr. Abrams a question. One, I have run this campaign with less than $100,000. I think you spent about $3.2 million. You have admitted that there's separation between, or you have said there's separation between government and politics in your office. One of the problems in this country is cost-effective government. Spending this kind of money, most of it on political advertisements, slinging mud. How can the people in New York State feel that you're equipped to vote on a budget in Washington to balance when you have spent outrageous sums of money in this campaign that has not really dealt around the issues and that has not really been cost effective, when on some polls you're very much behind?
Your answer.
I've run this campaign on the issues. First of all, on campaign finance reform, I've been there, Reverend Sharpton, for 20 years. I'm a very strong advocate of campaign finance reform.
We're talking about this campaign, though.
In this campaign, I have run on the issues, on health care, on cutting the defense budget, on getting jobs, on education, on choice. Where I have been on choice, I've differentiated myself from Geraldine Ferraro in a number of critical ways, because the voters of this state should know we're very different on cutting the defense budget. We're very different on health care.
But you haven't spent your money, different. You spend your money on other things.
No, sir. I've spent my money on delivering these messages to the people, traveling around this state, putting out literature, putting commercials on television that talk about choice, the environment, jobs, health care. These are cutting the defense budget. That's what the Bob Abrams campaign is all about.
Ms. Holtzman, who do you want to ask a question of?
Well, I think that...
whom, I should say.
We can get our grammar right, Gabe. I think that Bob Abrams and I have pointed out many differences that we both have with Geraldine Ferraro. She wants to make minimal cuts in the defense budget.
Yeah, who's the question to?
It's for Bob. She's not for substantial health care reform, for just a Band-Aid approach. We both have raised and are aware of the serious ethical allegations about her and her failure, for example, to deny that she took $340,000 from a child pornographer, even to apologize for that. But for many people, the question is, what's the difference between the two of us? And let's take the one defining moment in recent history in this country, the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearings. And what people saw there were very well-intentioned,
This is a long preface.
senators.
What's the question to Mr. Abrams?
I'm getting to it.
The difference between you and Mr. Abrams, or between you and Ms. Ferraro?
The difference, I'm trying to probe the differences between me and Mr. Abrams. We've set forth the differences between me and Bob Abrams and Geraldine Ferraro. In this defining moment, people saw in the Senate Judiciary Committee some very well-intentioned and principled senators who stood for the right things, but didn't stand up and ask the tough questions and protect Anita Hill. As Attorney General, you've taken the position that you don't always have to represent the state in cases against cases against the state of New York. And I remember when I brought a lawsuit against the judges in Brooklyn, suing them to stop racial discrimination in jury selection, and not only on a basis of race, but on a basis of ethnicity or religion or national background. You defended those judges. So how do we know, on a matter of principle, because I know you don't agree with that position, that you wouldn't stand up and fight? How do we know that you'll be different from those senators? People know that I took on a president of the United States.
I think the question is clear. Go ahead.
Okay. It's the obligation of the Attorney General under the oath of office to defend lawsuits that are brought against the state. And you have no choice in defending those lawsuits. Liz Holtzman is talking about, Liz, you know the lawsuit that you're talking about. It was an imperfect lawsuit. You didn't even get to the merits. It was dismissed because she had no standing. When there was the chance for that
But Bob, the Supreme Court of the United States agreed with the position that I took.
Give him a chance to answer.
Because it was done in a correct way when Joe Hines
and you justified the action of the judges in your position that you took in that case.
I'm going to claim discrimination. Women don't let men have a chance to speak here.
Okay.
When Joe Hines appropriately raised that issue, it then had the opportunity to go to the Supreme Court, and that was sustained.
Okay, now
the Attorney General has to defend lawsuits that are brought against the state.
Let's move on. The prefaces on all your questions were just too darn long, I think. They weren't really questions, they were speeches. But I think we still elicited some light. The classroom newspaper Weekly Reader, that's read by kids all over this country,
right,
2nd to 6th grades. And they took a poll of these school children all over the United States, and less than half believe that their government can be trusted to do what's right. Obviously, many voters are turned off. Only about 1/4 of the Democratic voters are expected to vote. Well, how do you explain this?
Because I think that the government has not reflected the citizens. There are no blacks, no Latinos in the Senate. We are talking about political infighting rather than talking about programs that will help people.
Yeah.
I think that we've got to start dealing with people and bringing common people into the election.
Well, why are the kids turned off?
The kids are the children of common people who've been excluded from the process.
Kids are turned off because people are turned off because of what they've seen when Senate didn't stand up and question Clarence Thomas or protect Anita Hill, and they didn't see courage or guts. When they saw the Senate cave in and the House of Representatives on the savings and loan, when they've seen a President of the United States and a Congress not get it on health care or jobs,
right,
they want someone they can respect. And what I bring to the U.S. Senate in this race, Gabe, is experience of standing up to a President of the United States, of leadership. I took on Nazi war criminals when no one else would.
Why do you
and
think
as controller, fighting other issues that no one else would.
Why do you think the kids are turned off, Mr. Abrams?
Because they see people in high, powerful political places who are not out there at the cutting edge, fighting with conscience on things that are important to people. Jobs, civil rights, the environment. They see powerful special interests having greater sway than the public interest. They see some politicians who don't have the guts and the independence to do the right thing.
I think kids are turned off because they hear their parents say, dear God, nobody's doing a damn thing to get things done in this country. And take a look at those politicians. All they do is lie.
Right,
and let me. I have to.
Do it in your summation.
Well, what I will do then is I will read the Ethics Committee report in my summation just to show that Bob Abrams is one of those politicians who has lied to people along his line in this campaign.
Now, I asked this question of Mr. Clinton and Mr. Brown in their debate in April here. I'm going to ask it of you. Do you have anything good to say about any of your opponents, Ms. Ferraro?
I have always been supporters of Bob Abrams and Liz Holtzman ever since they've decided to run for office, and am really very, very disappointed in how they've been behaving in this campaign. Reverend Sharpton, I have to tell you something. Knew not a thing about him other than what I read in the papers, and I thought he was the worst person going in the entire world. I'm impressed by how he has behaved in this campaign. I'm impressed by his views on the economy. Does that mean you're going to vote for me, Geraldine?
I very well may. I very well may.
And what about you, Mr. Abrams, as you look at the field here?
Well, look, I think the Democratic Party is a diverse party. It's got a lot of different kinds of people in there. I think we see a lot of differences being displayed in the course of this campaign, but I think the voters have to pick Who is the person, based upon achievement and merit, and who is the best person to go up against Al D'Amato?
I know, but
to be able to
do you
take
have
him
anything
out?
good to say about any of your opponents here?
I think they have worked hard in the course of this campaign.
And what about you, Ms. Holtzman?
Well, I've expressed already my admiration for Geraldine Ferraro's accomplishment when she ran for vice president. Bob Abrams has been a decent attorney general, so he took the wrong position in my suit. Al Sharpton represents a yearning for people for representation. But what I bring to the U.S. Senate is somebody who's got the experience in Washington to get tough legislation through and the
Mr.
guts
Sharpton.
to stand up for what's right.
As a Brooklyn boy, I'll always respect Liz Holtzman taking Emanuel Sella out of office. I think Ms. Ferraro's great symbolisms and history for women's breakthrough. And I think Bob Abrams has a very nice-looking family.
Okay, 30 seconds for each of you to sum up. We have to be fast. Mr. Abrams.
Well, if Jerry is going to quote, I want some time afterwards to be able to make sure that the people
We
know
can't stretch the clock.
about her underreported capital gain, which she had to pay $30,000 extra.
That's nothing. Good God.
I have served the people of this state as Attorney General. They've given me the privilege and the honor to do that. I've protected people's rights as consumers. I've protected the quality of the environment. I've protected their human civil rights, women, gays, lesbians, African Americans, Latinos. I want to go to Washington now.
I'm sorry.
To fight and protect.
Ms. Ferraro, you're next. 30 seconds.
Again, Bob Abrams has tossed lies at the people of this state in this campaign, and with the hope that it won't catch up to them. I want it to catch up right now. Reading from his own report, in which he said was found guilty. First, no, there was no finding of guilty at all. First, no information received by the committee staff in the course of the investigation indicates a deceptive intent on the part of Representative Ferraro. Instead, all facts point to error, oversight, misinterpretation of the reason for complete disclosure. That's right.
Okay,
second, she has amended the returns, and they indicate the Congresswoman's willingness to make
I
full
can't
disclosure.
change the others. Reverend Sharpton, it's your turn.
Provide the opportunity for the committee to change.
Sorry, we're out of time.
And so it's nothing
Go ahead.
at all substantiating what you
On
said.
September 15th, 1963, 4 girls died in a Birmingham church to give all Americans the right to vote. On September 15th, 1992, we will go to the polls. This vote is too sacred and too serious to just throw it away and to not make the right statement. Don't vote like you're at the racetrack on who you think will win. Vote for who you think is right and who represents what you're trying to say.
Ms. Holtzman.
We have a tremendous opportunity to defeat Alphonse D'Amato, and we have an opportunity to elect a woman. Geraldine Ferraro can't defeat Alphonse D'Amato. I can. Sometimes being a leader for issues is a lonely battle, but together, you and I, the people of this state, we can make a difference in Washington. We can make Washington get it on health care. We can make Washington get it on jobs. We can make Washington get it on human rights, on equal rights. That's what I want to fight for.
Thank you all for being here. I'm sorry you couldn't say all you wanted to say. I have one last question for all of you. Will you be here if you win to debate D'Amato on the Sunday before the election?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.